A storm swallows the coastline whole tonight. Rain turns sideways. The ocean throws itself at black rock like it's trying to erase everything standing here. And something is standing here. A tower impossibly tall granite, gone dark with rain rising out of the waves, like it clawed its way up from the seafloor itself. At the very top, a light still pulses. On, off, on, off. A heartbeat nobody should be alive to keep beating. Because 40 feet up on a walkway that groans under every shift of weight, someone presses their back to cold stone. Doesn't breathe. Footsteps climb behind them. Heavy, deliberate. Closing the distance one wet iron rung at a time. Somewhere below, a gunshot cracks through the storm, and the light keeps pulsing, watching, waiting to see who survives long enough to reach the top. The rain in Cutter's Point, Maine doesn't fall. It attacks. It comes sideways off the Atlantic needles of cold salt water, and it hits the granite tower like it's trying to knock it into the sea. I'm 40 feet up, on a rusted iron walkway that groans every time I shift my weight. Below me, waves crash against rocks that could break every bone in my body in under 2 seconds. And behind me, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, climbing. I press my back against cold stone and I don't breathe. Because breathing makes sound. And sound gets you killed. This is not where I thought I'd end up 3 weeks ago. Let me back up. My name is Greer Holloway. I'm 19 years old. And 6 months ago, I had a father. Malcolm Holloway built a shipping logistics empire out of a single leased warehouse in Portland when he was 26. By the time I was born, he had 40 of them, up and down the eastern seaboard. He used to say the ocean owed him a favor, and he was still collecting. He was not a soft man, but he was mine. I remember being 7 years old standing on the deck of our house in Kennebunkport, watching him point out at the water with a compass in his hand. Not a metaphor, an actual brass compass cold in my small palm. North doesn't lie to you, Greer, he said. People will, water will, but that needle always tells the truth. I didn't understand it then. I understand it now because everyone in my life has lied to me since. Everyone except a piece of magnetized metal sitting in a dead man's tackle box. My mother died when I was 7. Cancer, they told me. Fast the way it sometimes is here, one season gone by the next. I don't talk about her much. It isn't that it doesn't hurt. It's that it hurts too much to turn into small talk. 5 years ago, my father remarried. Her name was Renata Voss, a corporate consultant with a smile that never once reached her eyes, and a laugh that always sounded rehearsed like she'd practiced it in a mirror. She had a way of touching your shoulder that felt less like affection and more like she was checking your temperature for a fever she intended to profit from. I didn't trust her on day one. I never did. But my father loved her, or thought he did, and I've since learned that kind of love can be engineered, manufactured, if someone is patient enough. Renata Voss was nothing if not patient. 6 months ago, my father's heart stopped in his sleep. Coronary failure, the doctor said. Sudden, tragic. Nothing anyone could have done. I believed them. For a while. The will reading happened 2 weeks after the funeral in a glass conference room on the 11th floor of a law office in downtown Portland. I remember the smell of fresh coffee nobody was drinking. I remember the lawyer Corwin Delaney, a man who had known my father for 18 years, who had sat at our Thanksgiving table more times than I could count, refusing to look at me even once. He read from a document dated 3 weeks before my father's death. Everything went to Renata, the company, the house in Kennebunkport, the accounts, the properties, the boats. All of it. For me, there was a single line, a one-time distribution of $12,000, which Renata's people informed me 3 days later, was temporarily frozen pending probate review, which is a polite way of saying never. I sat in that glass room and felt the floor of my whole life fall away. My father had called me his anchor his entire life, and an anchor doesn't get left on the dock unless somebody cuts the rope. 2 weeks ago, on a Tuesday, that started like any other, Renata had 2 security guards walk me out of the only house I'd ever lived in. I stood on the porch, rain already starting. She stood behind the glass door in a cream-colored coat that cost more than my car. You're an adult now, Greer. Her voice flat through the glass. This house belongs to me. If you come back, I'll have you arrested. Behind her, I could see the hallway. My father's study, the door standing open. Then the deadbolt turned. That sound, that specific final click, I still hear it sometimes when I'm trying to sleep. I had a trash bag of clothes, a green tackle box that used to be my father's, and a car with a quarter tank of gas. That's what 19 years bought me. For 13 nights, I lived in that car. Parked behind a shuttered outlet mall off Route 1 windows, fogged with my own breath by 3 in the morning, eating crackers from a gas station because crackers don't need refrigeration, and I didn't have one. I didn't have anything. I kept asking the same question over and over until it wore a groove into my brain like a record skipping. Why would he do this? Why would the man who taught me to read a compass, who called me his anchor, who used to wake me up at 5 in the morning just to watch the sunrise over the harbor, why would that man leave me nothing? It didn't make sense because it wasn't supposed to, because it wasn't true. I just didn't know that yet. On the 13th night, I finally opened the tackle box. I'd been avoiding it. Every time I looked at it, sitting there in the passenger seat, I saw his hands. Big hands calloused from decades of gripping ship railings and steering wheels, and once my small shoulder at a funeral that wasn't his own. I unlatched it. The metal clasps were stiff with rust and salt air. Inside fishing lure's tangled line, a rubber worm that had melted slightly in some past summer heat. Ordinary. Sad. Just junk in a box, until the bottom tray shifted under my thumb. A half-inch give that shouldn't have been there. My heart started hammering the way it does right before something changes your life, and some animal part of your brain already knows it. I wedged my thumbnail under the plastic edge in pride. The false bottom lifted with a soft click. Underneath a folded square of yellow legal paper and a small brass keel, the kind with a round bow and worn teeth. My hands shook so hard I nearly tore the paper unfolding it. His handwriting, rushed, slanted almost sideways like he'd been running out of time even as he wrote. Greer, if you're reading this, it means she won. I'm sorry, I didn't leave you anything on paper because paper can be changed. Words on paper can be rewritten by anyone with the right lawyer and the wrong soul. This key opens a box at Coastal Trust Bank downtown. Box 217. Go there first. Trust the compass, son. Not the paper. Dad. I read it 4 times. Then I put the car in drive. The bank manager at Coastal Trust looked at me like I might be dangerous. 3 days of stubble. Clothes that hadn't seen a washing machine in almost 2 weeks. But I had the key and I had my license, and apparently that was enough. They put me in a small private room. A metal box sat on the table. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I lifted the lid. No cash inside. No jewelry. Just a manila folder. A property deed registered to something called North Star Maritime Holdings, LLC. Clipped to it a notarized letter naming me Greer Holloway as the sole owner of that LLC. Hidden. Off the books. Somewhere Renata's lawyers would never think to look because it wasn't in my father's name at all. The property address made my stomach drop. Cutter's Point, Maine. A stretch of coastline 3 hours north. I'd never heard of it. Never once in 19 years had my father mentioned it. Underneath the deed, one more thing. A single black and white photograph, the edges gone soft with age. A lighthouse, massive. A tower of dark stone rising out of jagged rocks like something out of another century. On the back in pencil in my father's handwriting from a version of himself I never knew. The truth doesn't hide in the dark, Greer. It hides in plain sight where nobody thinks to look up. Look up. Why did that phrase feel aimed directly at me? I pawned my father's old fishing reels for $81, filled the tank, bought a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter because that's what $81 gets you when you're trying to survive and chase a ghost at the same time. Then I drove north. The coastline got wilder the further I went. Trees leaning permanently sideways from decades of wind. Towns getting smaller, then disappearing altogether until it was just me and 2-lane blacktop and gray ocean daring me to keep going. My GPS lost signal 12 miles outside Cutter's Point. I kept driving anyway, following a hand-scrawled set of coordinates copied onto a gas station receipt. The road narrowed, turned to gravel, then to something barely a road at all, 2 ruts cut through scrub pine branches, scraping both sides of my car like the forest itself was trying to keep me out. Then the trees broke, and I saw it. I stopped the car in the middle of the dirt track. My foot came off the gas before my brain gave the order because what stood in front of me didn't fit into any category my mind had ready for it. A lighthouse. Not a small one. Not a postcard lighthouse with a cheerful little fence. This thing was enormous, 100 feet if it was an inch. A tower of dark granite blocks stacked and mortared by hands that worked a century and a half ago, rising straight up out of a spine of black rock that jutted into the ocean like the shoulder blade of something buried. The paint that once covered it had peeled into long curling strips hanging off the stone like dead skin. Near the top, a rusted iron balcony wrapped the tower's widest point, a widow's walk, though I didn't know the name yet. I'd learn it soon enough, and I'd learn why it was called that, and the answer would make my skin crawl. At the very top, behind glass gone cloudy with salt and time alight. Faint. Almost nothing. A pulse slow as a dying heartbeat. The Coast Guard had decommissioned this lighthouse, I'd find out later, just over a decade ago. Officially retired. Officially dark. Except it wasn't dark. Someone had kept that light alive. Someone who wasn't supposed to exist in my father's story at all. I sat there with both hands on the wheel and the engine ticking as it cooled, and I thought, this is not a house. Not a hunting cabin, not a barn, not any of the ordinary things a rich man hides money behind. This is a monument to what I didn't know yet. But my whole body understood before my mind caught up that whatever my father had buried here was going to be bigger than anything I could have imagined sitting in a gas station parking lot with a folded receipt and a prayer. I got out of the car. My boots sank into wet sand and crushed shell. The wind hit my chest like a shove, salt air thick enough to taste. Below, waves slammed the rocks in a rhythm that never let up the way grief doesn't pause to catch its breath either. There was a door at the base of the tower. Iron, riveted heavy, the kind you'd expect on a ship. A brass plate beside it had gone green with corrosion, and the keyhole looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Except the ground in front of it told a different story. The dirt was packed down, worn smooth. Footpaths don't form themselves in years of abandonment. They form because somebody walks the same 15 feet over and over week after week. Somebody had been here, recently, regularly. My hand went to my keys, the only thing sharp enough to call a weapon, and that's when I heard the voice. "You've got his eyes." I spun around so fast, I nearly went down on the wet rock. An older woman stood maybe 10 feet away. Silver hair pulled back, tied with what looked like actual fishing twine. A weathered green coat patched at both elbows. Boots caked in mud to the ankle. She held an oil lantern, its flame guttering against the wind, but refusing to go out. She looked at me like she already knew exactly who I was. "I'm sorry, what—" Malcolm's eyes? She stepped closer, studying my face the way you'd study a photograph you'd been carrying for years. Same gray, same way of squinting when you're scared and trying not to show it. My whole body went cold, colder than the rain. "You knew my father. I knew your father better than that woman he married ever did." Something hardened in her voice on the word woman, like it cost her something to say it politely. "Vivian Hale. I keep this light burning. Have done every night because a man asked me to, and I gave him my word. I don't break my word. Not for the Coast Guard, not for the county, not for anybody." I stood there, rain running down the back of my collar, trying to process a stranger standing in front of a lighthouse my father apparently owned in secret, telling me she'd kept a promise to a dead man. "I don't understand any of this," I said, and this time I didn't try to hide the crack in my voice. 3 weeks ago, I had a house. I had a father. I had a life that made sense. Now I'm standing on a rock in the middle of nowhere, talking to a stranger holding a lantern, and I need someone to tell me the truth. Just once. Just tonight. Vivian looked past me up at the tower at that faint, pulsing light. "The truth is bigger than you're ready for, boy. But your father knew you'd come. He left instructions for when that day came." "Instructions for what?" "For keeping you alive." Her expression cracked. Not weakness, something older. "He was afraid, Greer. In the last year of his life, more afraid than I ever saw him in the years I'd known him. And he wasn't afraid of dying." The waves crashed below us, rhythm unbroken. "He was afraid of what would happen to you after." She led me toward the iron door without waiting for me to agree. I followed because what else was there to do? Get back in a car with a quarter tank of gas and drive to nowhere. At the door, she pulled a ring of old iron keys from inside her coat. Before I open this, I need you to understand something. What's inside isn't money, not mostly. Your father was smarter than that. Money alone would have made you a target the second you walked out with it. Then what is it? The truth. She held my gaze in the lantern light, and for a second the flame caught something in her eyes that looked almost like fear. About your mother's people. About the company. About why a man worth $400 million spent the last 2 years of his life quietly restoring a decommissioned lighthouse on a dead-end road nobody drives down by accident. My chest tightened. My mother. What does she have to do with any of this? Vivian's hand paused on the key halfway to the lock. That's a conversation for inside, where the wind can't carry our voices back to town. She turned the key. The lock gave way with a heavy metallic groan, like something waking after years of sleep. The iron door swung inward hinges, shrieking, and cold air rolled out salt rust, old paper kerosene. History sealed up and left to wait. Welcome to your father's real legacy, Greer. Her voice dropped low. Try not to let it break you before I've had the chance to explain how to survive it. I stepped through. Behind me, the wind slammed the door half shut, and somewhere far above that faint light kept pulsing against the storm. A heartbeat that refused to stop even after the man who lit it first was gone. The inside of the lighthouse did not match the outside. That was the first thing that struck me. From the rocks, this thing looked like a ruin, something the ocean had been slowly eating for years. Except the inside was clean. Swept floors, oiled hinges. A wood stove in the corner threw actual heat, actual orange light behind its glass door. Someone had been living inside a monument the rest of the world had left for dead. You've been here, I said, this whole time. Somebody had to. Vivian set her lantern on a table bolted to the floor, bolted because storms here didn't just knock things over, they threw them. Your father paid for the restoration 8 years ago. Cash, quiet, no permits filed with the county. Officially, this tower's been condemned for well over a decade. And unofficially, it's the safest building on this coastline. She started up a spiral staircase bolted into the inner wall, iron steps ringing under her boots. Come on, your legs are shaking. Sit before you fall. I followed. Round and round walls curving in tight, my palm dragging along cold stone worn smooth by a century and a half of other hands doing exactly what mine was doing now. We stopped on the second level. A single room, a cot, a desk. Nautical charts pinned to the walls, yellowed ink notations scrawled across shipping lanes in handwriting I recognized instantly. His handwriting. My chest did something complicated, tightening and dropping at once. He worked up here. He thought up here. Vivian lowered herself into a chair that groaned under her weight. There's a difference. Down in Portland in that glass tower with your stepmother on his arm at every gala he performed. Up here alone, he actually thought. About the company, about the board, about her. I sat on the edge of the cot. My legs were still shaking. She'd been right about that. Tell me about my mother, I said. You said this had something to do with her. Something closed behind Vivian's eyes. Grief filed away so long it had calcified into something harder to name. Your mother's name was Eleanor, she said, and she didn't die of cancer alone. The room went quiet, just the wind screaming past the glass above and the endless crash of water on rock. What? I'm not saying the cancer wasn't real. Vivian leaned forward, elbows on knees, old hands folded like she was bracing herself. I'm saying it wasn't natural in the way you think. Malcolm didn't figure it out until years later, long after Eleanor was gone, when there was nothing left to do but grieve and get angry and bury both feelings so deep his second wife wouldn't see them. Figure out what? That someone in your mother's orbit had access to her medication for the better part of a year before she got sick. Vivian's jaw tightened. The specific cancer she developed has been linked in research your father paid a fortune to commission privately to prolonged exposure to a particular industrial compound, one manufactured by a company your mother's own family used to hold a stake in. My ears were ringing. Are you telling me someone poisoned my mother on purpose 12 years ago? I'm telling you, your father believed that. Came to believe it piece by piece the way a man believes something he doesn't want to be true only after the evidence stops leaving him any other option. Who? She didn't answer right away. Who, Vivian? I don't know, she said, and for the first time I believed the crack in her voice was real. He never told me the name. Said it was too dangerous for me to carry. Said if something happened to him before he could prove it, the less I knew, the safer I'd be. Which meant somewhere in this tower, behind some brick I hadn't found yet, there was a name, and I was going to find it. We ate in silence. Canned soup heated on the wood stove in two mismatched mugs because apparently nobody had thought to stock actual bowls in a secret lighthouse hideout. I almost laughed at that. The laugh died somewhere behind my ribs before it reached my throat. Why didn't he tell me any of this while he was alive? I finally asked. Why leave it in a locked tower, behind a locked door, behind a locked bank box, behind a locked tackle box? Because he was protecting you, or trying to. Vivian set her mug down. Your father spent the last 2 years of his life convinced that if the wrong person knew how much he'd figured out, you'd become collateral. 19 years old, no experience, easy to erase and call it grief-related. A car accident. An overdose nobody would question too hard. So instead he left me broke, sleeping in my car for 2 weeks. That was protecting me. That was buying you time. Her voice hardened, the first real edge I'd heard from her. 2 weeks of you looking pathetic and harmless to Renata was 2 weeks she wasn't watching you closely. Time for you to find that tackle box on your own schedule, not because anyone pushed you to it. Malcolm was playing a long game, Greer. Longer than I think even he expected to need. He didn't plan on dying at 53. I set my mug down, hands still shaking slightly. Then how did he die? Vivian looked at me for a long moment. That's what's in the vault below us. I think it's time you saw it. The vault sat 3 levels down past the living quarters, past a narrow storage room stacked with decades of maritime supply crates, down a staircase that got darker and colder with every step, until Vivian's lantern was the only thing standing between us and total black. At the bottom, a door. Not iron this time, steel thick as my forearm set into a frame, reinforced long after the original tower was built. A rotating combination wheel sat at its center brass, worn smooth by use. Except the wheel was hanging loose, wrenched half off its housing. Deep gouge marks scarred the metal around it, black at the edges, like something had been used to burn through the casing. Vivian froze. That wasn't like this 3 days ago. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Someone's been down here. Someone's been in this tower. She grabbed my arm, fingers digging in with more strength than I expected from a woman her age. Which means whoever it was knew exactly where to look, which means somebody talked. Talk to who? She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ruined lock, her expression going somewhere I couldn't follow. Somewhere old. Somewhere guilty. Vivian, my voice dropped low. Who did you tell? Nobody. Too fast, too sharp. I stared at her. That pause before nobody I'd heard that pause before, from lawyers who eat at Thanksgiving and don't look you in the eye, from stepmothers who smile without their eyes joining in. Vivian, we don't have time for this. She was already moving toward the ruined door, voice gone brisk and businesslike, a wall going up between us. Whoever did this might still be close. We need to see what's inside before what? Before they come back to finish the job. The vault door groaned open on hinges, not oiled as carefully as everything else in this place. Inside, not a bank vault full of gold the way I'd half imagined on the drive up. Something stranger, sadder. Filing cabinets. Rows of them, steel fireproof, crammed into a circular stone chamber at the base of a century-and-a-half-old lighthouse. On a table in the center, an open cabinet drawer, empty folders scattered across the floor, like something had been pulled fast, searched, abandoned, when the searcher didn't find what they wanted. They were looking for something specific, I said. They found the wrong drawer. Vivian knelt gathering papers with quick, practiced hands. Shipping manifests, company records, nothing that would hurt anybody. What they want isn't in here. Then where? She looked up at me, and in the lantern light I saw fear. Real fear, old and tired, the kind carried so long it stopped looking like fear and started looking like exhaustion. Your father built a second vault, one even I've never opened. The combination changes on a system only he understood something about your mother's birthday, cross-referenced with dates from your childhood. He never wrote down anywhere. He said if he ever needed to hide something from everyone, including me, that's where it would go. Where? Up. She pointed toward the staircase toward the tower rising above us into the storm, where he kept the actual light burning, in the lamp room. Nobody breaks into a working lighthouse mechanism expecting to find a second vault, which is exactly why he built it there. I was already moving toward the stairs. Greer, I need to see it. My voice cracked and I let it. I need to know what happened to him. What happened to her? I've spent 2 weeks sleeping in a car wondering if I imagined an entire relationship with my own father. I'm done wondering, Vivian. I need to know. She caught my sleeve at the base of the stairs. Then you need to know something else first. Something I should have told you the second you walked through that door. I stopped. What? 6 months ago. Her hands trembled and it wasn't the cold. Right around the time your father died. A man came to see me, well-dressed, soft-spoken, said he was helping settle Malcolm's estate, needed to understand the maintenance arrangement so it could be properly transferred. Vivian, my daughter's sick, Greer. The words rushed out like something breaking loose after being damned too long. Ray, 26 years old, kidney failure. The transplant list is years long and the private option costs more than I'll make in the rest of my life keeping this light burning for a dead man's promise. And this man, he knew that, somehow before I ever said a word. My blood went cold. What did you tell him? Nothing at first. Tears cut tracks through the wind-chapped skin of her face and she didn't wipe them away. But he kept coming back, every few weeks, asking small things. Was the light still running? Had anyone visited? Had a young man come asking about a green tackle box? The floor tilted under me. You told him about the tackle box. I didn't know what it meant. Her voice cracked into something raw. He never asked me to hurt you. He asked me to watch. And then last week when Ray's transplant fund came up $40,000 short and the hospital called about losing her spot on the list, he called, said the money would appear if I confirmed one thing. Confirmed what? That you'd found the deed. Her whole body shook now. That you were coming here. I stood there in the base of a stone tower my father built to protect me, listening to the one person he trusted enough to guard it tell me she'd sold my location for her daughter's life. And the terrible thing, worse than the betrayal itself, was that I understood it. Completely. If it had been my own mother dying, I don't know what I wouldn't have done. Who was he? I said quietly. The man who came to see you. Silver hair, expensive coat, called himself. The door at the top of the staircase blew open. Not from wind, boots. Heavy, fast, multiple sets pounding down stone steps that hadn't held that much weight in decades. Corwin Delaney. Vivian breathed, her face going the color of old bone. That's his name. And I think that's him coming down those stairs right now. I grabbed her and pulled us back behind the wall of filing cabinets, heart slamming so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Through the gap, I watched two shapes descend into the lantern light. The first I didn't recognize, big built like something you'd hire specifically for hurting people. A dark rain jacket dripping a steady line onto the stone floor. A pistol holstered against his hip, with no attempt made to hide it. The second I knew instantly. Silver hair slicked back despite the storm. A tailored coat that cost more than everything in my trash bag combined. Corwin Delaney had sat across from me at my father's will reading and hadn't once looked me in the eye. He was looking now, scanning the vault room with the flat, patient attention of a man checking a box off a list. The kid's car is up top, the big one said, rough and bored like this was routine. Means he's inside somewhere. Then find him, Rourke. Delaney's voice was smooth-cultured, the exact voice from that glass conference room, stripped now of every ounce of warmth he'd faked at every Thanksgiving I could remember. And the woman, too. If she's told him what she knows, we have a problem that needs solving before it leaves this island. My stomach turned to ice. A problem that needs solving. They weren't here for documents. They were here to make sure I never left this tower able to tell anyone what was in it. Beside me, Vivian's breathing had gone ragged, shallow, terrified. I pressed my hand over her mouth gently and shook my head. Her eyes, wide and wet above my fingers, held something I hadn't expected. Not just fear, resolve. She pulled my hand down slowly and leaned close enough that her whisper barely stirred the air. There's a way up, behind the last cabinet. Maintenance shaft runs straight to the lamp room. I used to climb it as a girl before your father ever bought this place, when it still belonged to the county and nobody minded a lighthouse keeper's kid poking around. You grew up here. There isn't time for my life story. Her eyes flicked toward Rourke's boots, moving now, searching the outer chamber. There's time for you to get up that shaft into that second vault before they find the entrance. Whatever's in there, it's the only leverage you're going to have. I'm not leaving you down here with them. You don't have a choice. Her hand found mine in the dark, squeezed once hard. I did something unforgivable. I know that. I'll live with what it cost me. But you climbing out of here alive with the truth, that's the only way any of this means something. That's the only way Ray's mother gets to look her daughter in the eye again and not just see what she sold. Vivian, go. Her voice broke on the word, but her grip didn't. Your father built this place so you'd survive whatever came looking for you. Let him be right about something one more time. The maintenance shaft was barely wide enough for my shoulders. Iron rungs, cold and slick with condensation, climbing straight up through the tower's stone spine, like a vein running to a heart still beating somewhere above me. I climbed in total darkness. No lantern, I couldn't risk the light. Just my hands finding rung after rung, my boots slipping twice my heart in my throat every foot of the way. Below, muffled through stone, voices rose. Vivian's sharp and defiant, then Delaney's cold and clipped, then something that froze my blood on the rungs. A single gunshot, muffled, distant, then silence. I stopped 15 feet up, every cell screaming at me to climb back down to do something. But if I went down, I'd die too, and whatever Malcolm Holloway had hidden at the top of this tower would die with me, buried under stone and salt water and years of lies. Trust the compass, son, not the paper. I climbed. Faster now, hand over hand, lungs burning until my head broke through into open space, and I was looking up into the lamp room itself, a circular chamber of glass and brass, the massive Fresnel lens throwing distorted shadows across curved walls, the mechanism inside still turning slow and patient, sending that faint pulse of light out into the storm. A heartbeat that had outlasted the man who started it. I hauled myself up onto the floor, chest heaving, hands scraped raw, and looked around at brass fittings and glass panels in a century and a half of maritime engineering, searching desperately for anything that looked like a second vault. Then I saw it. Carved into the base of the massive lens, housing nearly invisible, unless you already knew to look, a small brass panel. A keypad, old mechanical, 4 rotating dials instead of buttons. A combination only he understood. Something about your mother's birthday cross-referenced with dates from your childhood. My hands shook so badly I could barely turn the dials. Below me, through the shaft boots, hit iron rungs. Someone climbing after me. Maybe 90 seconds before whoever fired that gun reached the lamp room. 90 seconds to solve a puzzle my dead father had built specifically so no one but me could ever solve it in time. I closed my eyes. My mother's birthday, March, the 3rd month. My own birthday, October, the 10th month. The day she died, a date I'd spent 12 years trying to forget and somehow never had. The 7th. My fingers moved the dials. 3. 10. 7, the day I realized, throat-closing hands shaking harder, that this was also the day my father had taken me out on the water for the first time after she died 6 months later, and put a compass in my hand and told me north doesn't lie. The dials clicked into place. Somewhere deep in the brass housing, something released. A panel slid open at the base of the lens. Inside, not gold, not cash. A single sealed envelope, thick, heavy with paper. Across the front in handwriting, I would know anywhere one word. Evidence. The boots on the shaft ladder were close now. Close enough I could hear breathing between the metallic clangs. I grabbed the envelope, shoved it inside my jacket against my chest, and looked wildly around the glass chamber for anywhere to run. There was only one way out that didn't lead back down the shaft, a narrow door, half hidden behind the lens housing, leading onto the widow's walk. onto that rusted iron balcony wrapped around the tower's highest point. 40 feet above jagged rock and screaming ocean, in the middle of the worst storm I'd ever stood in, with a killer climbing up through the floor behind me and nowhere left to go but out. I pushed through the door into the storm and understood with total and terrible clarity exactly how this night was going to end, one way or another. The wind on the Widow's Walk hit like a wall. 40 feet up, rusted iron railings, slick with rain, the only thing between me and rocks that would end everything in about 2 seconds flat. Below, the Atlantic threw itself against the shoreline like it had a personal grudge against the whole night. I pressed my back to cold stone and didn't breathe because sound gets you killed. And somewhere behind that door, boots were still climbing. The envelope sat against my chest over my heart, and it felt like it weighed 100 pounds. One word in my father's handwriting, and I still didn't know what was inside it. I was about to find out whether I'd live long enough to read it. The door creaked open. Rourke stepped out onto the walkway, rain sheeting off his shoulders, pistol already up, already finding me in the dark like he'd done this 100 times before, and expected tonight to be no different. Nowhere left to climb, kid. I had my back against the railing. 40 feet of empty air behind me. In front of me, a man built like a doorframe with a gun and no reason to hesitate. "You don't have to do this," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which surprised me, which maybe saved my life in the next 4 seconds. "Not up to me." He stepped closer. "Delaney gives the orders. I just closed the file." My mind raced, grasping for anything, because my father hadn't built a fortress with only one door. Because he wouldn't have sent me up here to die in the exact spot he'd probably stood in himself 100 times, watching the same water, thinking the same thoughts. "Wait." I straightened, just slightly closing distance instead of cowering against the railing. "You work for Delaney, not for Renata." Something flickered across Rourke's face. Just a flicker. I saw it. "Same thing," he said. "Too fast." "Is it?" I pressed. "Delaney's the one who called Vivian. Delaney's the one managing all of this. If something goes wrong tonight, if a 19-year-old dies on a lighthouse, his own stepmother's lawyer was seen visiting, whose name ends up in the newspaper first, yours, not his. His fingerprints are nowhere on this." "Shut up. He's going to let you take the fall." My heart slammed against my ribs. That's how it always works with men like him. For 1/2 second, Rourke's gun hand dropped. Barely, an inch. It was enough. I threw myself sideways along the curve of the tower wall, and the shot that followed cracked into stone exactly where my head had been a heartbeat earlier. Rock chips stung my cheek. My ears rang. I ran because there was nowhere else to go except around the curve of that narrow iron walkway 40 feet up rain, blinding me one wrong step from the rocks below. The walkway wrapped the full circumference of the lamp room, which meant it eventually led back to the same door, which meant I was running in a circle toward the same man with the same gun. Think, Dad, if you built this place to keep me alive, you didn't build a dead end. Not you. My hand hit something cold, bolted to the tower wall at chest height. I almost ran past it blind. A ladder, old rusted, half hidden behind a support strut, running down along the outside of the tower toward the rocks below. An escape route, probably a century old, probably meant for keepers doing exterior maintenance in weather exactly like this. I didn't think. I grabbed it and went over the railing. Behind me, Rourke's boots hit the walkway fast, closing the gap. I climbed down into the storm rung after rung, rain hammering my knuckles, white wind trying to peel me off the wall. My foot slipped once. I caught myself. My heart stopped, restarted, kept going because it didn't have a choice. Above me, a shot. Then another. Sparks off metal an arm's length from my head. Then nothing. I looked up. Rourke had stopped at the top of the ladder gun, still raised but not firing, and for a strange suspended second I couldn't understand why. Then I heard it. Sirens. Distant but real. Getting closer. And Delaney's voice shouting from somewhere near the base of the tower, sharp with a panic I hadn't heard from him yet. "Rourke, get down here. We need to move. Someone called this in." Vivian, she was alive. She'd made the call. I hit the bottom rungs and dropped the last 6 feet onto wet rock, my ankle screaming, and didn't stop moving. I ran along the shoreline, away from the tower, away from the black SUV parked crooked in the dirt lot, away from every single thing that had tried to kill me in the last 20 minutes. I ran until the sirens got loud enough to drown out the ocean, And then I ran toward them instead. The next several hours moved like something happening to someone else, like I was watching my own life from a few feet outside my body. State police first, then federal agents because a shooting connected to a suspected homicide in a $400 million state moves fast up the chain of command. I sat wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket in the back of an ambulance that never actually took me anywhere, answering the same questions over and over while paramedics checked my ankle and the cuts on my cheek. Vivian was alive. The bullet had caught her shoulder, not her chest. Delaney's aim thrown off, I'd learned later by her own hand grabbing for the gun in the half second before it fired. She'd need surgery. She'd need a long recovery. But she was alive in an ambulance 40 feet from mine, and every time I caught a glimpse of her through the open doors, she was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Guilt. Relief. Something in between that didn't have a clean word. A woman in a dark blazer crouched in front of me sometime after 2 in the morning flashing a badge. FBI Special Agent Dana Reyes Financial Crimes Division with the tired, focused look of someone pulled out of bed by a phone call that changed her whole week. "I need you to tell me everything," she said. "Start wherever makes sense." So I did. The tackle box, the bank, the deed, the vault. The envelope still zipped inside my jacket, still pressed against my chest like it had fused to my skin. When I pulled it out and handed it to her, my hands shook so badly she had to hold it steady herself to open it. Inside, financial records. Bank transfers routed through 3 shell companies before landing in an account traced to a private research lab. Correspondence between Corwin Delaney and a chemical supplier discussing what the emails called, chillingly, the Eleanor situation, and later Phase 2. And beneath all of it, a private toxicology report commissioned quietly 11 years after my mother's death, when my father had finally gathered enough suspicion and enough money to pay for the truth. It confirmed what Vivian had told me 3 levels underground. Prolonged exposure. An industrial compound. A pattern of contact matching almost exactly medication routines from records my father had somehow impossibly preserved from over a decade earlier. Agent Reyes read in silence for a long time. "This is a murder case," she finally said quietly, like she needed to hear herself say it to believe it. "An old one, and based on what you're telling me about tonight, possibly 2. 2. She looked up, something careful entering her expression, the kind of careful that precedes bad news. "Your father's death certificate lists coronary failure. But if what's in this envelope is accurate, if Delaney was managing a decade-long pattern of exposure against your mother, we're going to want a very close look at whether that pattern continued, whether it ever really stopped." The ground tilted under me again. I'd spent 6 months grieving a man I thought had simply run out of heartbeats. Now I had to consider that someone had been counting them down instead. They arrested Corwin Delaney at his home in Portland 2 days later. Federal agents, a search warrant, financial records seized from a home office that contained enough paper trail to bury him twice over. Rourke was picked up trying to cross into Canada with $40,000 in cash and a passport that didn't hold up to scrutiny. Renata Voss they brought in the following week, once the financial threads connecting her accounts to Delaney's shell companies finished unraveling. I wasn't there for that arrest. I heard about it secondhand from Agent Reyes over the phone. Apparently, Renata screamed the whole way to the car. Apparently, she said my name more than once in a voice that didn't sound like the cold, composed woman who'd once stood behind a glass door and told me I was trespassing on my own childhood. I felt many things hearing that. Relief was in there somewhere. So was grief, strange, unexpected grief for a version of a family I never actually had, but had spent 19 years believing in anyway. Mostly, though, I just felt tired, the kind that doesn't go away with sleep. I visited Vivian in the hospital 11 days after the storm. Her shoulder was in a sling, her face pale in the fluorescent light, older somehow than it had looked in the lantern glow of the tower, like the truth had aged her all at once. She didn't speak when I came in, just watched me cross the room and sit in the plastic chair beside her bed, something in her eyes bracing for whatever I was about to say. "Ray's transplant fund," I said. "The 40,000 you needed." Her jaw tightened. "Greer, don't. I don't need your charity on top of everything else It's not charity." I pulled a folded document from my jacket, the same jacket that had carried my father's evidence through gunfire and a 100-foot climb down a storm-slick ladder. My father's estate cleared probate this morning. Emergency ruling given the circumstances. I'm the sole beneficiary. I know that. I don't see what it has to do with... I set up a fund. My voice caught and I let it because I was done pretending things didn't hurt. In my mother's name, for families who can't afford care they desperately need. Ray's the first recipient. Not because you helped Delaney find me, in spite of it. Vivian's eyes filled, and this time she didn't try to hold the tears back. I betrayed you, she whispered. I told a man exactly where to find you, knowing some part of me, knowing what he might do with that information. You also called the police the second his back was turned. I reached out and took her uninjured hand. You climbed a maintenance shaft as a little girl in a lighthouse that would one day save my life. You kept a light burning for years because you gave your word to a man who trusted you more than almost anyone else in his life. People aren't just the worst thing they've ever done, Vivian. My father believed that. I'm trying to. Why would you forgive me for this? I thought about my father, about a compass in a small palm, about North not lying even when everyone else did. Because you're the only person left, I said quietly, who actually knew him. Not the version in the newspapers, not the version in a will. The real one, the one who put a lighthouse back together with his own money because he couldn't stand the thought of a light going dark. I'm not ready to lose that too. Vivian cried for a long time after that. I sat there and let her because some griefs don't need fixing. They just need someone willing to stay in the room. 6 months later, I stood on the rocks below Cutter's Point Light with a hard hat under one arm and a set of architectural drawings under the other. The tower had a new coat of paint, white and gleaming the way it must have looked a century and a half ago when the first keeper climbed those spiral stairs and lit that lamp for the very first time. The widow's walk had been reinforced, repainted, the rust ground away, and replaced with iron strong enough to hold 100 people if it ever needed to. Because that's what it was going to hold eventually. People. Families like Vivian's families who'd lost someone to greed or violence, or a system too slow to catch the people responsible who needed somewhere quiet to remember and rebuild and start again. The Eleanor Holloway Foundation would open its doors within the year. A retreat, a resource center, a lighthouse in every sense of the word, a fixed point for people lost in weather they didn't choose and couldn't control. Vivian would run it. Her idea actually floated hesitantly during one of my hospital visits, like she was afraid to ask for a second chance she didn't think she deserved. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Ray had her transplant in March. I got a photograph in the mail 2 weeks later, a young woman sitting up in a hospital bed, thin but smiling, an arm around her mother's shoulders. On the back in handwriting, I was coming to recognize, as clearly as I once recognized, my father's Vivian had written 4 words. The light stays on. I keep that photograph in my father's tackle box now alongside the brass compass, alongside a folded piece of yellow legal paper that started all of this 3 weeks and a lifetime ago, in the passenger seat of a car with a quarter tank of gas and nowhere left to go. Some nights I still drive up here alone. I sit on the rocks below the tower and watch the light sweep out across black water in that same slow rhythm, a heartbeat that outlasted the man who first set it beating, and that now somehow outlasts the woman who almost let it go dark too. They thought a 19-year-old with a trash bag and an empty gas tank was easy to erase. They forgot the one thing my father spent his whole life teaching me. The needle doesn't lie. It just waits for you to stop spinning long enough to read it. And above the rocks at Cutter's Point, a light that was never supposed to burn again keeps turning through the dark night after night, guiding home anyone brave enough to still be looking for the shore.